1:51 a.m. On the night before Easter, central Moscow looked calm. Church bells rolled across the city. Choirs filled the Cathedral of Christ the Savior. Inside, Vladimir Putin stood in prayer. The image was clear: a holy night, a secure capital, and no visible threat. But 11.3 kilometers southwest of the cathedral, a white tulip delivery truck sat on a dark roadside with its engine running. Inside the cab, one tablet showed one red timer: 8 minutes 50 seconds. Its crosshairs were fixed on Vnukovo Airport, not the public terminal, not the main runway. The target was the apron beside VIP Terminal B. One IL-76 heavy transport aircraft was parked there under tighter security than the surrounding traffic. According to the strike package, the cargo bay held 4 Kh-47M2 Kinzhal missiles. Each missile weighed 4,300 kilograms. Total payload, 17,200 kilograms. That aircraft was the objective. A direct strike on Vnukovo would have failed. The inner defense belt around Moscow still had layered coverage. Short-range batteries guarded the low approaches. The S-400 battery at Dubna could support long-range tracking. An A-50 airborne radar aircraft was also feeding data into the network. So the raid did not open in the southwest. It opened in the north. 2 a.m., a van marked with an Easter bakery logo stopped near the Sheremetyevo sector. Its rear doors opened. 14 Pegasus decoy drones launched in 2 groups of 7 and climbed to 450 meters. Their job was not to survive. Their job was to force a response. A Pantsir S-1M crew picked them up almost at once. The battery fired 6 5.7E6 interceptor missiles. Each missile accelerated to about 3,300 kilometers per hour. The proximity fuses burst ahead of the swarm and spread tungsten fragments across the flight path. In 46 seconds, all 14 decoys were destroyed. The cost exchange was clear. Russia had spent about $1.08 million in interceptors to destroy a decoy package worth about $15,400. But the money was not the main loss. The main loss was attention. For the next 5 minutes, 3 of the 4 highest priority tracking channels covering that sector were pushed north toward Sheremetyevo. That shift reduced pressure on the southwest approach to Vnukovo at the exact moment the real strike package was waiting to move. There was a reason the target had been hidden at Vnukovo in the first place. Large air bases such as Engels were watched too closely by satellite. Vnukovo sat inside a VIP civilian zone. Russian planners assumed Kiev would hesitate to hit it. That assumption was wrong. 2:05 a.m., the tulip truck opened in the southwest. 6 mammoth strike drones lifted out, leveled at 18 meters above ground, and turned toward VIP Terminal B. The decoy raid in the north was finished. The real raid on Vnukovo had started. Subscribe and comment below. Was the first fatal mistake the interception over Sheremetyevo, or the decision to place 17,200 kilograms of strategic missiles inside Vnukovo's VIP zone? 2 a.m. The diversion began north of Moscow. An Easter bakery truck stopped on a dark service road near the Sheremetyevo sector. Its rear doors open. 12 Pegasus FPV-5 decoy drones launched in 2 waves of 6 and climbed to 460 meters. They were there to be detected. They were there to pull the first Russian response away from Vnukovo. The first unit to react was a Pantsir S-1M battery. Its phased array radar picked up the swarm almost at once. Inside the control cabin, the operator ordered an immediate engagement. The turret turned. The launch tubes kicked back. 6.57 E6 interceptor missiles left the launcher in quick succession. each accelerating to about Mach 2.8, or roughly 3,380 kilometers per hour. Orange exhaust tore across the northern sky over the suburbs. The interception was successful. As the missiles closed, their proximity fuses triggered ahead of the drones. Each burst scattered tungsten fragments across the flight path. The fragment cloud tore through the carbon frames and plastic shells of the Pegasus drones. By 2:41 a.m., all 12 decoys had been destroyed. Burning debris dropped onto frozen ground north of the city. On the Russian side, the result looked clean and complete. The numbers told a different story. Each 5.7 E6 interceptor in that exchange was valued at about $200,000. 6 missiles pushed the Russian side to roughly $1.2 million in expenditure. The full decoy package cost about $9,600, based on 12 drones at $800 each. Russia had spent 125 times more money to win the first exchange, and even that was not the main problem. The main problem was network attention. Moscow's air defense ring worked as one integrated system, not as isolated launchers. Once the northern swarm appeared, the response spread beyond the Pantsir S-1M battery. The S-400 battery at Dubna shifted long-range tracking toward Sheremetyevo. One A-50 airborne radar platform also redirected coverage to the same sector. Together, those higher-level assets moved about 80% of their immediate processing focus north. For the next 5 minutes, the southwest corridor leading to Vnukovo fell below normal surveillance density and was left mainly to lower-altitude standalone defenses. That was the real purpose of the decoy raid. It did not need to break Moscow's shield. It only needed to bend it. The interception in the north gave Russian crews a small tactical success, but it also confirmed the false direction of attack. While they were watching Sheremetyevo, the real route to Vnukovo was opening. At 2:05 a.m., the white tulip truck opened on the southwest side of the city. 6 mammoth strike drones lifted out and leveled at 18 meters above ground. Their route pointed straight at VIP Terminal B. The decoy phase was over. The real attack had started. Subscribe and comment below. Was the first real defeat the $1.2 million burned over Sheremetyevo, or the 5-minute surveillance gap that opened the route to Vnukovo? 2:05 a.m. The 6 mammoth strike drones lifted out of the white tulip truck and settled at 18 meters above ground. They turned toward Vnukovo Airport. That target had not been chosen by chance. Russian planners knew that major strategic air bases such as Engels were watched too closely. Satellite coverage over those fields was tighter. Aircraft loading, fuel movement, apron traffic, and transport arrivals were easier to track there. Moving high-value cargo through a known military base created too much exposure. So the cargo was moved to Vnukovo instead. The logic was simple. Vnukovo sat inside a controlled VIP civilian zone. It handled ministers, generals, state aircraft, and elite traffic. Russian planners believed that location gave them 2 advantages. First, it looked less suspicious than a heavily monitored strategic airbase. Second, it looked politically safer. They assumed Ukraine would hesitate to strike a high-profile terminal used by the Russian elite. That assumption created a fixed target. Beside VIP Terminal B, one Il-76 heavy transport aircraft sat in a known parking position under predictable lighting and ground control. Inside its cargo bay were 4 Kerch 47 M2 Kinjal missiles with a combined weight of 17,200 kilograms. What looked protected on paper was now concentrated in one place. That made the aircraft easier to find, not harder. The strike team also had one more advantage. Before launch, The Mammoth package had been loaded with a detailed three-dimensional flight map of the southwest approach to Vnukovo. The route was built around the tree line, the service road, the perimeter lanes, and the final run toward VYP Terminal B. The drones were not searching for the target. They were flying a prepared corridor toward a fixed point. That corridor mattered because the northern diversion had already done its job. The clash near Sheremetyevo had pulled the main Russian attention north. The Pantsir S-1M battery had fired. The S-400 battery at Dubna had shifted long-range tracking. The A-50 airborne radar platform had also redirected coverage. That left the southwest approach to Vnukovo under reduced surveillance, with the heavier network attention no longer focused where it had been minutes earlier. That was the opening the Mammoth drones were using now. They did not fly high. They did not rush. They stayed low, held formation, and moved under the stronger layer of Russian attention that had already been bent away from the route. By 2:07 a.m., the formation had crossed the most exposed stretch of the southwest lane. The final defensive layer was now ahead of them. The trap in the north had opened the path. The decision to use Vnukovo had exposed the target. Now the drones were close enough to test the last line protecting VYP Terminal B. Subscribe and comment below. Was the bigger mistake the diversion near Sheremetyevo, or the decision to hide 17,200 kilograms of strategic missiles inside Vnukovo's VYP zone? 2:08 a.m. The Krasuka 4 electronic warfare system activated west of Moscow. Its jamming field covered about 300 kilometers. In normal conditions, that would have been enough to disrupt GPS navigation, suppress standard radio control links, and break a low-cost drone attack before it reached the airport. It did not stop this one. The 6 Mammoth strike drones had been prepared for that problem 21 days earlier. They were not flying on live GPS. They were using inertial navigation backed by optical terrain matching. Their route had already been loaded before launch. The strike package did not need a normal radio control signal to stay on course. That meant Krasuka 4 could jam the airspace, but it could not erase the route already stored inside the drones. By 2:09 a.m., the formation was 2.4 kilometers from the outer perimeter of Vnukovo Airport. The drones were still holding 18 meters above ground when Mammoth 3 picked up headlights on its forward feed. It was an FSB patrol vehicle. The car was moving across the exact lane the drones were using. It was not in the strike package. It was not on the preloaded route map. If its high beams caught a drone in open ground, the dash camera could record the approach route and expose the operation before the strike reached V1P Terminal B. The pilot in Kiev had 4 seconds to react. He pushed the formation down from 18 meters to 9 meters and pulled the drones into the shadow of the tree line. The patrol vehicle crossed the lane at speed. Its headlights swept over the grass and passed within about 2 meters of the lowest drone silhouette. The vehicle kept moving. It did not stop. It did not turn back. It had not seen them. That patrol car was not there by accident. 3 days earlier, Russian signals units had intercepted a leaked transmission linked to one U.S. Air Force RC-135 rivet joint operating over the Black Sea. The warning was only partly true. It said a stealth drone attack was coming against a strategic apron near Moscow. But the coordinates in that warning pointed to Domodedovo Airport, not Vnukovo. The FSB reacted to the wrong location. Elite patrol assets were pushed toward Domodedovo. The vehicle that crossed the Mammoth route was one of those units moving between sectors after that false alarm. The leak had not stopped the strike. It had pulled Russian ground security toward the wrong airport and thinned the pattern near Vnukovo. By 2:10 a.m., the formation was moving again. Krasuka 4 had failed to knock it down. The patrol vehicle had failed to expose it. The false coordinates had already done their part. The drones were now 1.8 kilometers from VYP Terminal B. Subscribe and comment below. Was the bigger failure the patrol crossing the route, or the false coordinates that pulled the FSB toward Domodedovo? 2:11 a.m. The 6 Mammoth strike drones crossed the outer perimeter of Vnukovo Airport. The lead camera picked up the dark outline of the apron near VIP Terminal B. At that same moment, the last local defense reacted. A Panzer S-1M unit guarding the terminal caught the swarm when its low-altitude infrared sensor cluster picked up the thermal signature from the drone motors. The operator fired at once. Drone 1 and Drone 2 were hit almost immediately and crashed onto the tarmac in flames. In a few seconds, the strike package dropped from 6 drones to 4. The attack did not stop there. Drone 5, call sign Krosanka, switched to fiber optic guidance. An ultra-thin 0.5 millimeter cable began to spool out from its tail. From that moment on, the drone was no longer relying on a standard radio frequency control link. It moved forward in silence. The Panzer operator lost the RF tracking signal. The lock he expected was gone. The local commander called the S-400 base in Dubna for support. Its gravestone radar came online and searched for the surviving drones. It failed for one simple reason: the strike package was too low. The drones were moving at roughly 12 meters, or about 40 feet, above ground. From Dubna, that put them below the effective radar horizon for a clean long-range engagement. By 2:12 a.m., the 4 surviving Mammoth drones were over the last defensive line. They passed above the roof of the Panzer S-1M launcher at a distance of about 28 meters. The crew below could hear the carbon propellers cutting through the freezing air, but the system could not generate a working lock. The drones were emitting no usable radio signal, and the cold night air was masking their thermal profile just enough to delay a second shot. Seconds later, the lead optical camera cleared the launcher roof and sent back the first clean view of the objective. Under the yellow apron lights stood one Il-76 heavy transport aircraft with its rear cargo ramp hanging open. Inside the cargo bay sat 4 Kerch 47 M2 Kinjal missiles secured in their transport cradles. The final local shield had failed. The target was fully exposed. Subscribe and comment below. Was the real turning point the loss of 2 drones at the perimeter, or the moment Krosanka switched to fiber optic guidance and stripped the Panzer of its tracking lock? 2:12 a.m. The target was fully exposed. Under the yellow apron lights at VIP Terminal B, one Il-76 heavy transport aircraft stood with its rear cargo ramp hanging open. Inside the hold were 4 Kh-47 M2 Kinjal missiles secured in transport cradles. The surviving 4 Mammoth drones were now inside the final approach lane. The strike no longer depended on penetration. It depended on one accurate hit. Kill authority went to the last attack drone, call sign Pisanka. Unlike the other drones, Pisanka was carrying a 1.8 kilogram shaped charge thermobaric warhead, equal to about 4 pounds. The warhead did not need to destroy the aircraft by itself. It only needed to cut into 1 Kinjal missile casing and ignite the fuel and munitions already inside the cargo hold. 2:12:24 a.m. Pisanka aligned with the open ramp and accelerated to about 130 kilometers per hour, or 80 miles per hour. The path into the hold was clear. The drone crossed the apron, entered the cargo opening, and struck the first missile cradle. The shaped charge fired instantly. Its focused metal jet burned at about 2,200 degrees Celsius, or 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and punched through the casing of the nearest Kinjal. That was enough to start sympathetic detonation. The drone's own warhead was small. The payload inside the Il-76 was not. Inside the aircraft were 4 Kinjal missiles with a combined weight of 17,200 kilograms, plus onboard aviation fuel. Once the first missile casing was penetrated, the fire and pressure inside the cargo bay triggered a chain reaction through the load. For a brief moment, the apron froze. Then the aircraft disappeared inside a single expanding fireball. By 2:13 a.m., the strike had produced 3 confirmed destructive results. First, 1 Il-76 heavy transport aircraft was destroyed. Second, 4 Ka-47 Tipkiem 2 Kinjal missiles were destroyed. Third, 2 nearby business jets, 1 Gulfstream and 1 Bombardier, were destroyed by blast pressure and fire. Damage spread beyond the aircraft parking line. The blast shattered the apron-facing glass at VYP Terminal B and damaged ground equipment near the target area. The exact number of destroyed or damaged service vehicles had not been confirmed. Personnel losses were still unclear. At that stage, there was no confirmed figure for Russian personnel killed or wounded on the apron. There was also no confirmed casualty figure for terminal staff, air crew, ground security, or responding emergency crews. The equipment losses were visible. The personnel losses were still unconfirmed, but the operational result was already clear. The diversion near Sheremetyevo bent the defense network. The false coordinates pulled ground security toward Domodedovo. The low approach carried the strike package under the weakened southwest corridor. Fiber optic guidance stripped the Pantsir S-1M of its clean lock, and the open cargo ramp turned the Il-76 into a stationary kill point. By 2:14 a.m., the strike was over. The confirmed losses were exact. 1 Il-76 destroyed, 4 Kinjal missiles destroyed, 2 business jets destroyed. Personnel casualties not confirmed. Subscribe and comment below. Was the decisive mistake the open cargo ramp, or the decision to keep all 4 Kinjal missiles on a single Il-76 inside Vnukovo's VYP zone?
At 4:31 a.m., a Russian assault group stopped existing as a fighting force inside a trench network near the Hulyai-Pol axis. In less than 5 seconds, more than 2,700 troops and over 65 armored vehicles were trapped inside ground they had already judged safe to occupy. There was no missile strike, no artillery preparation, no drone swarm overhead. The first warning did not come from radar, radio, or the sky. It came from the earth. Bunker junctions dropped first. Trench walls folded inward in sequence. Vehicles lost footing as the ground beneath them gave way. So how did an abandoned Ukrainian position turn into a kill zone that erased an entire force in seconds? Hours earlier, Russian command believed it had found a clean opening on the southern front. Reconnaissance reports described a Ukrainian defensive belt east of Hulyai-Pol that appeared to have been abandoned in good order. The trench network stretched for nearly 30 kilometers. More than 50 reinforced bunkers were still standing. Access trenches were open. Firing lanes remained organized. The geometry was intact. That detail mattered. This did not look like a line that had been shattered after prolonged fighting. It looked like a position left behind early, before Russian forces could close the gap and destroy it in place. Electronic warfare teams scanned the sector before the assault moved in. The results were weak and inconclusive. No strong emissions, no active jamming, no clear command traffic. Thermal signatures were faint and scattered. Nothing indicated that a large Ukrainian force was still operating inside the line. Under normal assessment, a silent sector with intact cover and usable bunkers is not treated as a warning. It is treated as an opportunity. A few analysts disagreed. The position looked too clean. There were too few signs of a rushed withdrawal. Too little blast damage for a belt that valuable. Too little disorder around bunker entrances, trench junctions, and vehicle access points. A real withdrawal usually leaves broken patterns, debris, abandoned equipment, or visible structural damage behind. This one did not. The layout still looked controlled. The silence did not fit. Still, no stop order was issued. Command was under pressure to exploit the opening fast, secure the line intact, and convert it into a forward base before Ukraine could return with artillery, reserves, or drones. Waiting meant losing momentum. A full bombardment risked destroying a position that looked ready to use. The decision chain followed standard logic. Scan the line, confirm low emissions, push assault elements forward, clear the bunkers, hold the network intact, reuse the cover. That sequence was the trap. Ukraine did not need Russian forces to panic. It needed them to follow procedure. Enter in good order, use the bunkers, pull more men inside, treat the trench system as shelter instead of a contested line. Every step made sense. Every step increased density. Every step reduced the chance of escape once the ground started to fail. From the Russian command post, the decision remained defensible. For Ukraine, the outcome was already fixed. Stay with us as we break down how Ukraine built this underground trap and why Russian forces did not recognize it until the line began collapsing beneath them. Russian forces entered the trench line expecting resistance. They found none. The first assault elements advanced cautiously through the outer sections. Bunker after bunker, junction after junction, standard entry procedure, weapons up, brief pauses at every turn. Quick checks inside firing bays, dugouts, and bunker interiors. They expected scattered resistance, delayed fire, or a few Ukrainian rear elements left behind to slow the advance. None of it happened. No rifle fire, no mortar correction, no artillery walked onto the line, no FPV drones appeared over the approach roads. The silence held. That changed the assessment quickly. What began as a cautious breach soon looked like a clean seizure of intact ground. The first reports from forward units were consistent. No contact. Position clear. Bunkers usable. Each report lowered the perceived risk for the units moving in behind them. Once the first elements reported the line clear, the mission stopped feeling like an assault and started feeling like an occupation. Russian command moved immediately to secure the network. More infantry was pushed forward to widen control of the line. Additional teams secured bunker clusters, trench intersections, and internal routes between sectors. Engineers checked access lanes and load points. Command groups shifted closer to the center of the position. The goal was simple: lock down the trench system fast and turn it into a working forward base before Ukraine could respond. The position encouraged exactly that. The deeper bunkers offered overhead cover. The trench walls masked movement from direct observation. Connected firing bays allowed troops to move between sections without crossing open ground. Inside the network, the line no longer felt abandoned. It felt usable. It felt safer than the open terrain around it. That was when density began to rise. Once troops stop treating a captured line as a threat and start treating it as shelter, their behavior changes. Spacing tightens. Men pull inward. Equipment follows. Radios are brought closer. Ammunition is stacked where the cover is strongest. Fuel and supply vehicles move toward the easiest access points. Under battlefield pressure, that is not unusual. It is normal. It saves time. It shortens movement. It simplifies command and resupply. By the time the first wave had finished clearing the main sections, the trench network was no longer just being entered. It was starting to fill. Stay with us as we break down how that captured line became a crowded forward base, and why that made the collapse even deadlier. By then, Russian forces were no longer just holding the trench line. They were beginning to use it. What had begun as a cleared position was now being treated as a usable forward position. More troops were moved inward. More equipment followed. The line was no longer functioning like a recently captured objective. It was starting to function like a forward operating base. That shift changed the target. Infantry units that had entered cautiously began moving with more confidence. Bunker interiors were reorganized. Ammunition was stacked closer to the deeper covered sections. Radios and relay equipment were pulled inward to reduce exposure. Supply vehicles no longer treated the trench network as a temporary halt. The captured line was no longer just being secured, it was being used. Density increased with every passing hour. The best protected bunker clusters drew the most activity. Command teams preferred the deeper covered sections. Communication nodes were placed where overhead protection was strongest. Ammunition was moved where access was easiest. Fuel and supply vehicles were brought closer to the main access routes feeding into the trench system. None of this was unusual. It was standard behavior. That predictability made the trap deadlier. The more Russian units relied on the trench line, the more they compressed into the parts of the network that looked strongest. Troops moved inward for cover. Vehicles gathered near hardened access points. Resupply shortened its routes. Command stayed close to the center for speed and control. The position no longer functioned like a contested battlefield. It functioned like a protected rear node just behind the line. That was when the target hardened. Once a captured position stops feeling contested, discipline begins to loosen. Movement becomes less dispersed. Men spend longer inside covered sections. Routes are reused. Clusters form around the same bunker entrances and trench crossings. Equipment is parked where it can be reached quickly instead of where it can be spread safely. No single decision looks serious on its own. Together, they reshape the entire target. By then, Russian command had what it wanted, a forward base that looked intact, protected, and increasingly useful. But that same process was producing something else at the same time. The thermal footprint was growing, vehicle concentration was increasing, personnel density was rising across the strongest sections of the trench network. What looked efficient on the ground was becoming a denser target from above. Ukraine did not need to interrupt that process. It needed the process to continue. No immediate counterattack followed. No urgent artillery strike forced Russian troops back out into the open. No drone pressure disrupted the buildup. Every hour without a major response made the position feel more secure. And the more secure it felt, the more men, vehicles, ammunition, and command functions were pulled into the same protected spaces. The trench line was no longer just occupied. It was saturated. And once the network reached that point, the trap no longer depended on whether Russian forces would stay. It depended on when Ukraine decided the density was high enough. Stay with us as we break down what was hidden under the trench line, and why the collapse began exactly where Russian forces thought they were safest. Russian forces were now inside the trench line above ground. The killing mechanism was below it. Before the withdrawal, Ukrainian engineers had already altered the network itself. From above, it still looked like a standard defensive belt. The trench geometry was correct. The bunker spacing looked correct. The firing lanes made sense. Nothing in the layout was supposed to look false. The position only had to do one thing: pass inspection long enough to be occupied intact. Only part of it was built to hold. The rest was built to collapse. Key sections of the network had been rigged before the withdrawal. Structural weak points had been created beneath bunker clusters, trench junctions, and the access routes most likely to channel vehicles inward. This was not arranged around a single blast point. It was built around sequential ground failure. The objective was not to destroy the line in one detonation. It was to make the ground fail in the exact sections where Russian troops and vehicles would gather once the position began functioning as a base. That made it more dangerous than a minefield. A minefield keeps forces out. This system worked only after forces moved in. A conventional ambush tries to hit troops before they settle. This one waited for the line to fill. Ukraine did not need Russian troops exposed in the open. It needed them under cover, close together, using the bunkers, trench crossings, and access lanes exactly as planned. The trigger system followed the same logic. There were no active emissions to detect, no radio frequency trigger to jam, no electronic signature strong enough to identify the line as a prepared demolition zone. Russian forces had already checked for the obvious signs of a trap. The system had been designed to deny them each one. But concealment was only half of it. The rest was sequencing. The first failures were designed to begin where Russian troops would feel most secure, around the deeper bunker clusters, the covered movement junctions, and the access points feeding men, ammunition, and vehicles into the line. One collapse would force movement into the next choke point. One blocked trench section would redirect traffic into another. One dropped bunker entrance would trap men inside and build pressure behind them. The line was not built to fail in one moment. It was built to fold inward in stages, faster than the troops inside it could react or disperse. By the time Russian units had turned the trench line into a crowded forward base, the trap was now live. The density was there. The routes were fixed. The strongest sections had become the deadliest parts of the network. At that point, concealment no longer mattered as much as timing. All Ukraine had to do was wait. Stay with us as we break down the exact moment the ground gave way, and how the collapse spread through the line before Russian forces could get out. At 4:31 a.m., the sequence began. There was no visible launch, no warning flare, no incoming strike to track, no flight path to evade. The first change came through the ground. A buried shockwave moved under the trench floor, fast enough to outrun reaction, too brief to give clear warning. Men inside the line felt it before they understood what was happening. Then the structure began to fail. The first collapses hit the densest points. Bunker junctions dropped first. Trench walls folded inward in sequence. Covered crossings failed under load. Vehicle access lanes lost stability. Tanks and supply vehicles tilted as the ground beneath them gave way. In the deeper sections, bunker entrances collapsed and sealed men inside before they could climb out or disperse. This was not one detonation. It was a chain of structural failure, each collapse driving the next. That made the first seconds lethal. Russian units were not hit at one point. They were caught inside failure spreading through the parts of the network they trusted most. One collapse redirected movement into the next choke point. One blocked trench section forced men and equipment back toward another weak section. Escape routes narrowed almost immediately. In some sectors, they disappeared altogether. Then the pressure began to build. Inside the enclosed bunker clusters, air displacement, debris, and confined force turned collapse into overpressure. Men who survived the first drop were trapped behind rubble, buried under soil, or crushed in the entrances they had used for cover. Along the vehicle points and supply routes, fuel carriers, ammunition, and parked vehicles were thrown into the same confined spaces where troops were already packed tight. That was when secondary detonations began. Fuel ignited. Ammunition began to cook off. The collapse was now driving secondary damage. What started below ground was now breaking through the surface. Burning fuel, falling trench walls, trapped vehicles, blocked routes, and compressed troop concentrations turned local failure into a full kill zone. Russian forces inside the network had almost no time to reorganize. Units tried to move, climb out, and call for support. The structure was failing faster than commands could move through it. Communications began to break almost at once. Fragmented transmissions came through first. Short calls, partial reports, broken location updates, then silence. Command groups deeper inside the line lost contact with outer sections. Outer sections could no longer see what had failed farther in. The same trench network that had provided cover was now trapping personnel inside disconnected pockets of collapse, fire, and blocked escape. By the end of the sequence, the line had lost all coherence. What Russian forces had treated as a forward base was no longer functioning as a position, a route, or a shelter. It had become disturbed ground filled with trapped men, disabled vehicles, igniting ammunition, and failed bunker sections. In less than 5 seconds, the trench network stopped operating as a military asset. It became a sealed kill zone. The collapse began in the places Russian forces trusted most. Stay with us as we break down what Russian command saw next, and why almost nothing inside the trench line could be recovered after the collapse. For hours after the collapse began, the trench line no longer functioned as a military position. From above, it had become broken ground, scattered thermal signatures, blocked routes, and collapsed trench sections that no longer connected in any usable way. The bunker clusters that had drawn the most activity were now the most dangerous sectors to re-enter. Access points were blocked. Covered crossings were gone. Fires continued to burn in confined sections where fuel and ammunition had ignited after the ground failed. Russian command tried to restore control. Primary channels were checked first, then backup nets, then local relays. The pattern was consistent. Fragmented transmissions, partial responses, long gaps, then nothing usable. Units outside the trench line could see that the position had failed, but they could not see how deep the collapse had gone or which sections were still accessible. The same network that had provided cover hours earlier was now concealing the full scale of the loss. That made recovery almost impossible. Any attempt to re-enter the line meant crossing unstable ground, blocked trench sections, collapsed bunker entrances, fire, smoke, and the risk of more secondary detonations. Men inside the network had been split into isolated pockets. Vehicles pulled forward for efficiency were now part of the obstruction. Ammunition and fuel that had supported the buildup were now feeding the secondary fires and detonations. The trench line had stopped functioning as cover, as a route, and as a base. It had become a sealed kill zone. By that point, the logic of the trap was fully visible. The position had looked intact. It had looked usable. It had looked worth holding. That was enough. Once Russian forces accepted that picture, the rest followed through normal procedure. More men moved in. More vehicles followed. Movement compressed. Command shifted closer. The strongest sections of the line became the densest parts of the target. By the time the ground failed, the result had already been decided. Russian forces were not destroyed because they entered the wrong trench line. They were destroyed because they decided it was safe to hold. On this battlefield, that is enough to erase a force. Subscribe and comment below. Would you trust a position that looks this perfect? At 5:47 a.m., local time, Russia's biggest fighter reinforcement to Crimea had just collapsed. More than $600 million worth of Russia's newest air power had just been taken out of the fight. 12 fully armed Su-30SM fighters sat stranded on the flight line as explosions ripped across Belbek Air Base. Russian commanders scrambled Su-35S fighters while S-400 Triumph batteries fired desperately into the morning sky. It was already too late. By the time Russia realized what Ukraine was actually targeting, there were only minutes left to stop it. The explosions were only the ending. The real story was why Ukraine chose to wait, and how those final minutes turned Russia's fighter reinforcement into a disaster before it ever entered the fight. The explosions at Belbek had not happened by chance. They began with a decision Moscow made days earlier. Across Crimea, the operational picture was changing. Ukrainian long-range drone attacks were becoming more frequent. Air defense crews were spending longer hours behind their radar screens. Fighter squadrons were flying more sorties with fewer aircraft available for maintenance. Every successful interception demanded more missiles, more fuel, and more crews than the week before. Moscow decided the peninsula needed more air power. Within 48 hours, 12 Su-30SM multi-role fighters began arriving at Belbek Air Base, escorted by 2 Il-76 MD-90A transport aircraft carrying maintenance personnel, spare engines, additional R-77 and R-73 air-to-air missiles, and ground support equipment. The reinforcement package was valued at more than $600 million, making it one of Russia's largest fighter deployments to Crimea in recent months. Protecting the new squadron quickly became an operation of its own. S-400 Triumph batteries expanded radar coverage across western Crimea. Additional Panzer S-1 systems moved closer to Belbek's flight line. Su-35S fighters increased combat air patrols over the Black Sea as Russian commanders prepared for what they believed would be an immediate Ukrainian response. Russian planners concluded that Belbek now had enough fighters and layered air defenses to withstand another wave of Ukrainian strikes. The attack never came. The new fighters landed safely. Ground crews unloaded equipment without interruption. Fuel convoys rolled onto the airfield. To Moscow, the reinforcement mission appeared complete. Inside the Ukrainian command center, the response was surprisingly brief. Hold. No drones crossed into Crimea. No missiles were launched. Russian commanders believed the new squadron was finally ready for combat. Ukrainian commanders saw something very different. For the first time since leaving Russian airspace, every aircraft, every ground crew, and every critical support vehicle was beginning to come together in one place. The operation had finally become vulnerable. Hours before the explosions, Ukraine finally made its first move. At 4:41 a.m., Shark reconnaissance UA-5s lifted off from concealed launch sites in southern Ukraine. PD-2 surveillance drones climbed toward their observation altitude over the Black Sea, while several FP-02 decoy drones headed directly toward western Crimea. None of them carried the main strike. More surprisingly, none of them flew toward Belbek Air Base. Nothing about the approach resembled a conventional strike. Russian radar operators detected the approaching contacts within minutes. S-400 Triumph batteries switched to combat readiness. Su-35S fighters scrambled from their shelters. Air defense crews across western Crimea prepared for what looked like the opening phase of another Ukrainian drone attack. Then, everything changed. Just as the first S-400 radar locked onto a Shark UAV, Ukrainian operators made a split-second decision. The drone broke away from its planned route and dropped below radar coverage. Seconds later, the PD-2 turned south over the Black Sea. The FP-02 decoys split into different directions. To Russian commanders, the mission appeared to be falling apart. It wasn't. Ukraine had just protected the real strike. While Russian crews focused on chasing disappearing contacts, Ukrainian intelligence quietly recorded every S-400 radar activation, every Su-35S scramble, and every command transmission leaving Belbek. Each reaction exposed another layer of how the base would defend itself during a real attack. Only then did Ukraine's objective become clear. The drones had never been trying to reach Belbek. They were forcing its defenders to reveal how they would fight. One mistake now would expose the entire operation. One drone shot down over Crimea could force Ukraine to abandon the strike before it had truly begun. Then, the tension suddenly eased. Convinced the threat had passed, Russian commanders gradually returned parts of their air defense network to their normal operating rhythm. They believed they had just driven another Ukrainian reconnaissance mission away. Instead, they had just shown Ukraine exactly how Belbek would react when the real attack came. The reconnaissance mission ended without a single shot being fired. But by dawn, Russian commanders had already reached one conclusion. Ukraine was preparing something much larger. The response came immediately. At 5:03 a.m., Belbek stopped following its normal routine. Fuel schedules changed. Maintenance crews were redistributed. Su-35S combat air patrols abandoned their fixed rotations. Most importantly, the newly arrived Su-30SM fighters were no longer being prepared for combat at the same time. The operational window Ukraine had been waiting for was disappearing. To verify the changes, one Shark reconnaissance UA-5 cautiously returned toward western Crimea. Within minutes, a Su-35S turned directly toward its flight path. The operators had only seconds to decide: continue the mission or protect the operation. They pulled the drone away. Another 30 seconds in the air could have exposed every drone still waiting outside Crimea. The reconnaissance mission was over. The intelligence operation had just succeeded. Inside the Ukrainian command center, surveillance feeds from the previous hour were compared with the latest imagery. The conclusion was immediate. The defensive pattern they had studied no longer existed. Radar coverage had changed. Combat air patrols had changed. Most importantly, the reinforced squadron would never again become fully vulnerable at the same moment. Weeks of preparation had just collapsed. Nobody argued. Nobody asked for another review. The order came immediately. Abort the original plan. Russia believed it had rewritten the rules of the battle. Ukraine reached a different conclusion. The next strike would have to be a completely different operation. The original strike package was never used. Within minutes of canceling it, Ukrainian commanders began building a completely different operation. This time, every drone received a different mission, not a different target, a different purpose. Shark reconnaissance UAVs would observe only. Their job was to watch Belbek without revealing the attack. FP-02 drones would become the first visible threat, drawing Russian attention away from the real operation. Additional decoy UAVs would deliberately trigger S-400 Triumph radars and force Russian air defense crews to reveal their priorities. One part of the operation did not change. The Storm Shadow missiles remained exactly where they had always been. Everything else was rebuilt around them. The battlefield no longer depended on firepower. It depended on timing. Whoever understood that timing first would control everything that followed. While Russian commanders adjusted fighter patrols and radar coverage, Ukrainian reconnaissance crews quietly tracked fuel trucks, missile loading vehicles, and maintenance teams moving across Belbek. Aircraft departed from different shelters. Support vehicles did not. Before each launch cycle, they always returned to the same place. The pattern repeated itself again and again. Only then did the new operation finally make sense. The fighters were never the real objective. The real objective was the brief moment when an entire combat squadron depended on the same fuel, the same missile loading teams, and the same maintenance crews. Destroy that support system, and the squadron would lose the ability to fight even if every aircraft survived. Ukraine was no longer hunting Su-30s. It was hunting the only few minutes that kept the entire squadron combat ready. At 5:41 a.m., ground crews across Belbek Air Base began preparing 12 Su-30SM fighters for their next combat rotation. Ukraine had been waiting days for this exact moment. It would last less than 6 minutes. Across the flight line, ATZ-10 fuel trucks rolled into position as refueling crews connected hoses beneath the waiting fighters. Beneath the wings, missile teams rapidly mounted R-77 and R-73 missiles, one aircraft after another. Nearby, technicians completed the final radar checks while Russian pilots climbed into their cockpits and brought the fighters online. For the first time that morning, the entire squadron depended on the same support system. Ukrainian reconnaissance operators recognized the pattern immediately. This was the window. No one asked for another confirmation. The order came at once. Execute Phase 1. FP-02 drones launched first, flying directly toward western Crimea. Their mission was simple: be seen. Moments later, additional decoy UA-5Es approached from different directions, forcing Russian radar operators to classify multiple contacts at once. High above the Black Sea, Shark reconnaissance UA-5s remained outside the engagement zone, quietly confirming every movement around Belbek. Meanwhile, Storm Shadow launch crews held their positions, waiting for one final confirmation. Russian commanders reacted almost instantly. Across western Crimea, S-400 Triumph batteries switched to full combat readiness as radar operators tracked the growing number of incoming contacts. Su-35S fighters accelerated toward the approaching drones while command channels filled with urgent requests for updated target information. The operation had begun. The main strike had not. Every passing second now worked against Ukraine. On the flight line, refueling hoses were disconnected. Missile-loading vehicles rolled away from the aircraft. Ground crews cleared the flight line. One by one, Russian pilots sealed their canopies and prepared to taxi. The window was closing. With every passing second, the conditions Ukraine had been waiting for were beginning to disappear. The Storm Shadow missiles still hadn't launched. One final confirmation still hadn't arrived. If Ukraine lost these last few minutes, days of planning would collapse before the first missile ever left its launcher. At 5:44 a.m., the last fuel truck reached Belbek's flight line. Missile loading teams stepped away from the aircraft. Ground crews disconnected the final refueling hoses. Russian pilots sealed their canopies and brought the Su-30SM fighters online. For the first time that morning, every condition Ukraine had been waiting for existed at the same moment. Seconds later, a Shark reconnaissance UA-5 transmitted one word: confirmed. The answer came immediately: execute Phase 2. The Ukrainian formation broke apart. FP-02 drones continued directly toward western Crimea, remaining clearly visible on Russian radar. Additional decoy UAVs split into multiple groups. Some climbed higher. Others dropped toward the Black Sea. Several turned sharply north, forcing Russian radar operators to classify new tracks within seconds. Russian commanders responded immediately. S-400 Triumph batteries launched interceptor missiles across western Crimea. Panzer S-1 systems opened fire, filling the sky with streams of tracer rounds. Above them, Su-35S fighters raced toward the incoming drone formations, while Krasuka-4 electronic warfare systems blanketed the area with jamming. Above western Crimea, the sky was saturated with targets. Below, Belbek's flight line remained exposed. Ukraine answered every move. As Russian fighters shifted west, one decoy group changed direction. Another disappeared below the radar horizon. A third continued straight ahead, deliberately drawing Russian attention away from Belbek. Unlike the Shark reconnaissance UAVs, the decoy drones were never expected to survive. They had only one mission: keep Russian defenses occupied for a few seconds longer. Inside Russian command vehicles, officers kept redirecting interceptors toward new contacts as fresh tracks continued appearing across their screens. Across the airbase, the last support vehicles continued leaving the flight line. The window was closing. Every maneuver bought another second. Every second pushed the operation closer to launch. Russian command channels became increasingly urgent as air defense units requested updated target assignments and redirected interceptors toward new contacts. Russian commanders believed they were defeating Ukraine's attack. They were defeating exactly what Ukraine wanted them to fight. The Storm Shadow missiles had not even been launched. Russian air defenses remained locked onto the incoming FP-02 drones. Radar operators continued tracking new contacts spreading across western Crimea. Every interceptor, every fighter, every radar crew remained focused on the distraction Ukraine had deliberately created. That was the moment Ukraine had been waiting for. There was no hesitation. Launch. The first Storm Shadow missiles slipped across the Black Sea at low altitude before turning toward Belbek Air Base. Russian air defenses were already fully committed. There was no time to reorganize. The opportunity had already slipped away. Seconds later, the flight line erupted. The missiles ignored the parked Su-30SM fighters. Instead, they struck the system preparing those fighters for combat. The first explosion tore through the refueling area. A TZ-10 fuel trucks erupted into flames, sending burning fuel across the flight line. Another missile slammed into the missile preparation area, disrupting missile loading operations as R-77 and R-73 handling crews abandoned their work and ran for cover. A third strike ripped through the final launch preparation area, scattering maintenance teams before the first fighters could begin taxiing. Within moments, the entire launch sequence collapsed. Russian ground crews scrambled for cover. Pilots remained inside their cockpits, waiting for orders that never came. The engines were still running. The aircraft were still intact. The runway was still open. Smoke drifted slowly across the flight line. The 12 Su-30SM fighters remained exactly where they had been minutes earlier, ready for combat, unable to enter it. Not a single Su-30SM entered the sky. Russia restored the airbase, and in doing so, it restored the next vulnerability. Within days, more Su-35S fighters arrived in Crimea. Additional Panzer S-1 systems were repositioned around key airfields. Fuel, maintenance, and missile crews returned. The cycle began again, but every reinforcement followed the same requirement. Fuel had to be delivered, weapons had to be loaded, aircraft had to be prepared. Ground crews had to repeat the same sequence from the beginning. Ukraine no longer needed to guess how the system worked. It had already seen the pattern. Every reinforcement recreated the same brief window of vulnerability. Moscow believed more fighters would secure Crimea. Ukraine reached a different conclusion. Crimea did not become vulnerable because Russia was weak. It became vulnerable because Russia had no choice but to keep reinforcing it. The flight line would be repaired. The fighters would fly again. The ground crews would return. And with them, the same brief window of vulnerability would return. The question is no longer about firepower. It is about systems. Modern war is no longer decided at the point of impact, but at the point of repetition. 11 p.m. Kubinka, Moscow. The Nebo-M radar system suddenly lets out long, horrifying roars. These are chilling sounds, tearing through the quiet control room like the horns signaling the absolute end of the world. On the massive digital screens, not just hundreds, but thousands of red blips erupt all at once. They are surging in madly from every conceivable direction. They are coming from the west, cutting across Belarus from the south, hugging the Moskva River from the northeast, and looping around the outer suburbs like the inescapable jaws of death closing in on the capital. Meanwhile, deep inside the fortified walls of the Kremlin, the boss of Russia remains completely oblivious to the impending nightmare. His eyes are glued to the latest intelligence reports detailing the escalating war between the US-Israel coalition and Iran. 2,700 miles away. Down there, the chaos has just pushed Brent crude oil prices to an astonishing $185 per barrel, obliterating the highest records since 2022. He breaks into a deeply satisfied smile. The oil flows, the money pours in like an endless tidal wave, and the first quarter defense budget has just surged by a staggering 65%. In his mind, everything is running perfectly according to his grand, untouchable plan. But in exactly 45 minutes, that confident smile will freeze solid. Tonight's supreme smugness will soon turn into the most painful, devastating, and humiliating slap he has ever had to endure. To understand how the most heavily defended airspace on the planet is about to be systematically dismantled, we have to rewind the clock. 9 p.m., the Ukraine-Belarus border. Along the desolate, freezing forest roads, massive camouflage trucks are parked, scattered and hidden in the pitch-black darkness. They look like ordinary heavy cargo vehicles, the exact kind that Russian border guards might glance at once and wave through without a single thorough inspection. But then, the heavy automatic tarps quietly retract, revealing that what is waiting inside is anything but ordinary cargo. Over 1,500 engines start up simultaneously. Their low, steady hum sounds like a colossal swarm of metallic bees that have just been awakened. It is a sound quiet enough that no human ear in the distance can detect it, but loud enough to permanently change the course of the war. 3 minutes later, the entire massive swarm of UAVs lifts off the launch pads and immediately scatters in every direction, looking like someone just blew on a handful of dandelion seeds in a hurricane. None of them fly straight toward Moscow, because flying straight is the fastest way to get shot down en route. Ukraine has known that for a very long time, and tonight they are rewriting the rules of aerial warfare. First, there are two distinct groups with two very different suicidal roles. 250 UJ, 22 drones hug the frozen terrain at terrifyingly low altitudes, fluctuating strictly between 80 and 150 feet. They are slipping through the dark river valleys, skirting the jagged hillsides, and brilliantly exploiting the thermal crossover of the night air to mask their heat signatures while staying completely below the radar horizon. Russia's long-range early warning radars are designed to look far out across the continent, not down at their own feet. It is like standing on a skyscraper with a sniper scope, frantically searching for an intruder, while the assassin is crawling silently right under your balcony. Above them, 150 Liuti drones fly much higher. They are deliberately emitting clear, undeniable signals, practically screaming their presence into the night sky. They are decoys, but they are decoys carrying massive, live warheads. If the defenders shoot them down, they waste millions of dollars in irreplaceable ammunition. If they ignore them, the capital takes the hit. Russia will have to choose, and tonight, whatever it chooses will be fatally wrong. The entire swarm of 1,500 aircraft flies in absolute terrifying radio silence. GPS is off, radio transmission is off. Every single electronic emission that the Krasuka 4 electronic warfare system could possibly intercept has been killed. Instead, they rely on advanced visual odometry combined with inertial navigation. They are essentially looking at the ground with optical sensors and following pre-programmed high-resolution terrain maps. It is like walking home at 2 a.m. in pitch blackness, navigating every turn purely by memory. The state-of-the-art Krasuka 4 system is desperately sweeping the entire electromagnetic spectrum within a massive 300-mile radius. But it is picking up exactly one thing: dead, unyielding silence. It will take another agonizing 2 hours before the Nebo M radar at Kubinka finally starts receiving the first undeniable signals of the approaching doom. 11:04 p.m. The night sky is suddenly ripped apart. The first Pantsir S-1 battery opens fire. A hypersonic 5.7E6 missile leaves the launcher in a blinding white column of flame, tearing through the Moscow night sky in under a second. Then, the second, the third. Within 90 seconds, all 50 Pantsir S-1 batteries positioned in a ring around the capital are in frantic, continuous action. Each one is locking onto targets and unleashing fire in its own desperate rhythm, creating a continuous, blinding cascade of flashes across Moscow's protective dome. They're putting on a magnificent, terrifying light show, but they are burning through $500,000 missiles just to hunt cheap metallic sparrows. While the Pantsir S-1S are distracted overhead, the 250 low-altitude UJ-22S are quietly doing the exact opposite, threading along the Moskva River Valley, sending out not a single byte of data. But Ukraine isn't relying on mere numbers and brute force. Another 400 drones, including 60 massive Baba Yaga motherships, are circling in the pitch-black periphery. They are conserving battery, acting as the ultimate tactical reserve. The Baba Yagas are continuously broadcasting, jamming, and spoofing localized signals, forming the indestructible backbone of an AI mesh network. They are connecting and coordinating the swarm via encrypted updates every 0.1 seconds, watching the Pantsir S-1 salvos, calculating ammo depletion, and waiting to strike the exact moment the defenders run dry. 11:10 p.m. The massive S-400 Triumph at Dubna, 56 miles north, joins the chaotic fight. The S-400 is a long-range apex predator designed to eliminate high-value targets like strategic bombers and electronic warfare systems. It ignores the high-flying decoys. That is the Pantsir S-1's job. The S-400 is hunting something much bigger, and its gravestone radar just found it. Right now, the Baba Yaga motherships are emitting high-power jamming and spoofing signals to coordinate the swarm. To the Russian radar, these do not look like drones. They look like a massive enemy electronic command center. Priority target number 1. The S-400 locks on without hesitation, calculates the trajectory, and launches its massive $8 million 40N6E missiles. If they succeed in wiping out the motherships, the AI mesh network collapses, and the entire campaign evaporates before the main strike. But the mothership activates its ace. A blinding plasma flare erupts into the freezing air, creating a raging red cloud with temperatures spiking over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit in a fraction of a second. The radar instantly shifts its lock to the cloud. It is bigger, hotter, and clearer. The multi-million-dollar missiles explode harmlessly in the Moscow sky like unscheduled, incredibly expensive fireworks. 11:31 p.m. Kiev activates Phase 3. 120 AQ-400 Scythe drones, the ones that had been entirely silent from the start, suddenly light up every electronic signal at once. Radio, GPS, everything. It is a deafening electronic roar, as noisy as a group of rioters bursting into a quiet library at midnight. This is not a technical glitch. It is a calculated trap. The S-400, fresh off wasting millions on an empty plasma cloud, is aggressively hunting its next target. The AQ-400s just gave it exactly what it wants. The system locks instantly and starts allocating missiles. This is precisely the distraction Ukraine wanted. Because while the heavy air defenses are busy looking up at those electronic decoys, the real nightmare begins from within. Deep inside Moscow's outer industrial zones, 10 heavy trucks with local license plates quietly retract their roofs. They have been parked there for 2 days, looking exactly like ordinary delivery vehicles. The drivers are not professional spies. They are sleeper assets. They are ordinary Muscovites, warehouse owners, and mechanics, living completely normal lives until they receive a single encrypted message. Tonight, that message was sent. 150 fiber-optic FPV drones lift off from the truck beds. They begin unspooling microscopic optical cables and accelerating rapidly toward their targets. They are controlled directly via cables thinner than human hair, transmitting high-definition video and steering commands with light at under 1 millisecond latency. They emit absolutely zero radio frequency. They leave no trace on any radar screen. While the sky above burns with missiles and decoys, these silent assassins are racing through the dark city, completely undetected. 11:44 p.m. The tactical map on Moscow's air defense screens now looks like a computer infected with a terminal virus. Red dots are everywhere, overlapping and moving on trajectories the prediction algorithms simply cannot keep up with. The inner layer of defense, the Tor M2 batteries, move frantically into combat position. Ka-52 helicopters lift off to chase the low-flying drones in the pitch-black darkness. But it is a desperate losing battle. Despite their utmost efforts, 350 UAVs slip entirely through the exhausted, depleted defense network. They are no longer taking orders. They are flying to preset coordinates independently. They are 350 bullets already fired, only waiting to violently reach their mark. 11:53 p.m. 4 sights, 11 seconds. This is the exact moment the entire Moscow sky begins to burn. The Lobnya pumping station explodes first. A drone burrows straight into the heart of a massive storage tank before detonating. 10 million liters of crude oil react the only way physics allows, erupting into a towering 1,000-foot column of raging fire. It is bright enough that someone at the Kremlin, 13 miles away, could easily read a newspaper by its terrifying light. Tonight, Russia just gave away millions of barrels of oil for free to the night sky. Less than 11 seconds later, Vnukovo Airport is struck. A swarm of low-flying drones hits the southern runway and the main fuel depot. The concrete runway cracks violently in multiple places. The aviation fuel ignites and spreads to the aircraft parking area like glowing floodwater. The airport declares an immediate emergency closure. With that single blow, Russia's entire covert military transport schedule, hauling heavy weapons under the disguise of civilian flights, is completely severed. But the Klin ammunition depot is fundamentally different. it does not just burn, it detonates. The silent fiber optic FPV drones plunge directly into an S-300 missile reserve. When the first warhead catches fire, the surrounding ones have no choice but to follow in a catastrophic chain reaction. Each missile feeds kinetic energy to the next until the entire massive depot becomes a single, earth-shattering explosion, equivalent to 2,500 tons of TNT. A blinding, 600-foot fireball violently pushes away the darkness. The brutal shockwave ripples outward, shattering glass in buildings simultaneously within a 10-mile radius, like someone snapped their giant fingers. And finally, the most agonizing target of all, Mytishchi. A synchronized pack of fiber optic drones slams directly into the critical high-voltage substation. Within 4 seconds, 75% of the Moscow region's heavy industrial infrastructure goes completely, terrifyingly dark. The remaining Transneft pipelines immediately lose all pumping power, and the massive safety valves slam shut automatically. The heart of the war machine has just been paralyzed. 0:15 a.m. The heavy, ornate doors of the Kremlin meeting room swing open. The earlier triumphant discussions about the US-Israel coalition and the massive oil revenue from the escalating tensions in Iran abruptly cease. A single, trembling aide steps forward and places a classified damage report directly onto the president's desk. Let us talk about the brutal math of modern warfare, because this is the part that truly breaks empires. The massive Transneft pipelines are completely offline. The primary Western export routes are down by 75% capacity, requiring at least 30 days of agonizing, highly specialized repairs. For every single day of that downtime, $500 million in crucial state revenue vanishes into thin air. At a time when crude oil is peaking at a historic $185 a barrel, the total revenue loss over that month equals a staggering, irreplaceable $15 billion. But the financial bleed is only the beginning. The military catastrophe is far worse. The entire strategic reserve of the Klin ammunition depot is simply gone, reduced to a glowing, radioactive crater. Every single S-300 interceptor missile meant for the brutal front lines has been vaporized. The exhausted Russian air defense units in the Donbass sector will not be resupplied for at least 2 months. Ukraine knew exactly what they were doing, and their ground forces are already mobilizing to violently exploit that newly created hole in the sky. Inside the Kremlin, the Grand Room falls into a suffocating dead silence for several long minutes as the catastrophic figures are read out loud. No one dares to breathe. No one dares to look up at the Moscow sky outside the armored windows, where the horizon is still glowing an angry, unnatural red. The smug, satisfied smile from exactly 45 minutes ago has been completely wiped away, replaced by the cold, horrifying realization of defeat. The impenetrable fortress has been breached from the inside out. If you were the unseen commander in Kiev tonight, watching the enemy's economy burn to the ground, which high-value target would you hunt next? 6 a.m. The morning after. The sun tries to rise over Moscow, but its light cannot pierce the thick, suffocating black smoke billowing from Vnukovo Airport and the Lobnya pumping station. The city that once prided itself on being an impenetrable fortress now wakes up to a terrifying new reality. Sirens wail endlessly in the distance, echoing through streets paralyzed by the massive 75% power grid failure. The freezing air tastes of burning aviation fuel and crushed national pride. At the Primorsk port, massive oil tankers sit idle in the icy waters. The captains wait for the crude oil to flow, completely unaware that the automated valves will remain dead for the next 30 days, violently bleeding $15 billion directly from the state's war chest. The primary economic artery has been severed. Back in Kyiv, the campaign coordinator quietly unplugs a single encrypted hard drive. The massive AI mesh network has automatically dissolved, leaving absolutely no digital footprint behind. The sleeper cells deep inside Moscow have already vanished, packing away their fiber optic controllers and blending flawlessly back into the panicked, chaotic crowds. They are ghosts who just broke the back of a superpower without firing a single conventional bullet. The chessboard has been brutally flipped. The old rules of engagement are dead and buried under the burning rubble of the capital. If you were the unseen commander in Kiev tonight watching the enemy's economy burn to the ground, which high-value target would you hunt next? Would it be the heavily guarded natural gas pipelines permanently severing their last remaining economic lifeline? The massive naval export ports in the freezing Baltic Sea? Or would you hunt down something far more unconventional, perhaps exploiting the thermal crossover blind spots, weaponizing the air intakes of their remaining strategic bombers on the tarmac, or triggering a catastrophic chain reaction inside a hidden thermobaric silo? Drop your tactical choices in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And remember, in modern warfare, the most devastating attacks are the ones you never hear coming. 4:12 in the morning, the Eastern Front. The sky is completely dark. A thick, cold mist hangs over the forest. Suddenly, a deep rumble breaks the quiet. 36 Russian attack helicopters tear through the sky. This is a massive strike force. The fast KAV-52 helicopters fly in the front. The heavy, armored Mi-28 helicopters follow close behind. Together, this flying group is worth over $800 million. They carry heavy weapons. They are looking for targets. But inside the cockpits, the pilots feel something strange. The air is too quiet. The pilots check their control panels. The screens are completely blank. There are no flashing red lights. There are no loud missile alarms ringing in their headsets. For the past 72 hours, this entire battle zone has been dead silent. The enemy turned off all their radar stations. They stopped sending radio signals. They grounded all their drones. To the pilot's eyes, the ground below looks totally empty. To the advanced computers on board, the airspace is perfectly clear. But total silence in a war zone is never normal. It is a trick. The enemy forces did not run away. They did not pack up their weapons and leave. They simply unplugged their machines. They chose to hide in the shadows. The helicopters push forward and fly faster. They reach speeds of 280 kilometers per hour. The pilots drop their machines extremely low. They fly just 30 meters above the treetops. This low height keeps them hidden from long-range radar. It lets them strike fast and escape quickly. They fly 10 kilometers deep into the zone. Then 20 kilometers, nothing changes. The fuel levels are steady. The weapons are armed and ready. The radar screens stay dark. Slowly, the pilots start to relax. The total silence makes them feel safe. They truly believe the path is clear. This false confidence changes how they fly. The pilots tighten their formation. They bring the huge helicopters dangerously close together. They leave only 150 meters of space between each aircraft. They're now 30 kilometers deep inside enemy territory. Every system tells them they are safe. They think they are the hunters. They do not realize they are the prey. The 72 hours of silence was bait. It was a carefully planned trap. Down below, in the cold mud, enemy soldiers are waiting. They have been sitting in the dark for 2 full days. They did not light fires. They did not use radios. They just watched the sky. They knew exactly which route the helicopters would take. The airspace is not empty. It is heavily controlled. And the 36 pilots are flying blindly toward their own end. 4:13 in the morning. The 36 helicopters push deeper into the false corridor. They are now 30 kilometers behind the front line. The pilots look out of their windows. The forest below is completely dark and still. Everything still looks perfectly clear. There are no radar sweeps hitting their machines. There are no missile warnings sounding in the cockpits. The early morning sky is totally empty. But down on the ground, the reality is completely different. The airspace is not abandoned. It is heavily monitored. Every single meter the helicopters fly is being tracked in real time. The enemy forces are watching them closely, but they are not using normal military radar. Normal radar sends out a strong electronic signal and waits for it to bounce back. It acts like a very bright flashlight in a dark room. It easily finds the target, but it also shows the target exactly where the radar station is located. The hidden forces did not want to reveal their positions, so they completely changed their strategy. Instead of turning on their flashlights, they simply opened their eyes and listened. They switched to passive detection networks. These advanced computer systems do not transmit any energy into the sky. They stay completely quiet. They only catch signals that already exist in the air. They listen to the invisible reflections from distant radio towers. They capture normal television broadcasts. They monitor background electromagnetic noise. When 36 massive metal machines fly through that invisible noise, they break the signals. They create electronic waves. They cast digital shadows. The passive systems see those shadows perfectly. Even when the helicopters fly extremely low at 30 meters, even when they travel at a blistering 280 kilometers per hour, the pilots have absolutely no idea. Their expensive warning systems are designed to detect the bright flashlight of an active radar. They cannot detect a silent shadow. They keep flying forward in their tight, dangerous formation. They stay exactly 150 meters apart. On the cold ground below, over 80 air defense teams are fully prepared. They are spread carefully across a massive 30-kilometer zone. Each small team is assigned a specific piece of the sky. They carry deadly Stinger and Igla shoulder-fired missiles. They stay completely hidden under the dark trees. There is no movement. There is zero radio traffic. They do not need to talk to each other. They only need perfect timing. Right beside these hidden soldiers, over 150 attack drones sit in small clearings. They are completely powered down. They have no GPS connection active. They make absolutely no sound. The drone operators sit with their fingers resting on the controls. They wait in absolute silence. From the air, there is absolutely nothing to detect. But from the ground, the entire battlefield is alive. The helicopters are moving deeper into a massive weapon built to stay completely invisible. By the time the pilots finally understand the trap, they will already be in the exact center of the kill zone. There will be no way out. 4:14 in the morning, the 36 helicopters reach the exact center of the dark corridor. They are now deeply trapped inside enemy territory. Everything still looks completely safe. Suddenly, a massive spike of energy hits the helicopter sensors. Loud alarms finally scream inside the cockpits. For the very first time in 72 hours, the enemy radar comes alive. It is not a system error. It is a perfectly timed strike. The radar stays on for less than 10 seconds. It is a very short and bright digital flash. 10 seconds is not enough time for the pilots to react, but it is more than enough time for the enemy to lock onto every single machine. The quick radar flash grabs their exact position, their speed, and their flight path. Then, the radar goes completely dark again. 10 seconds later, the dark forest erupts with fire. The first missile shoots up from the trees below. Then a second, then 10 more. Over 80 hidden air defense teams fire their weapons at the exact same time. The missiles launch from many different angles and distances. They all rush toward the tight group of helicopters. The Russian pilots shout desperate warnings over the radio. They drop bright flares from their aircraft to confuse the incoming weapons. They pull hard on their controls to break the tight formation, but they are flying too fast. They are only 150 meters apart. There is no room to turn. There is no safe direction. The attack comes from everywhere at once. The first missile finds its target. A lead Ka-52 helicopter takes a direct hit to its main body. The huge machine spins wildly out of control. It crashes violently into the trees below. Seconds later, a heavy Mi-28 explodes in a massive ball of fire. Then a third helicopter falls from the sky. The safe corridor is gone. It is now a cage of fire. But the missiles are only the first wave. The sky is about to get much worse. Suddenly, a massive swarm of small machines wakes up. Over 150 attack drones launch into the air. They fly low and incredibly fast. These are cheap, commercial drones modified with deadly explosives. They do not use radar. Human operators control them manually from hidden bunkers. The operators wear special video goggles to see exactly what the drones see. They fly them like birds of prey. The drones act like a swarm of angry bees. They actively hunt the large helicopters. They target the hot engines. They aim for the weak tail rotors. They chase the damaged aircraft that are desperately trying to escape. The air is completely filled with thick smoke, burning metal, and flying explosives. The perfect trap has finally snapped shut. 4:15 in the morning. This is no longer a battle. It is pure survival. Less than a minute after the first strike, the massive helicopter formation completely falls apart. The safe distance between the machines is gone. Pilots pull their heavy control sticks in every direction. Some try to climb high into the dark sky to escape the fast drones, but higher altitude makes them completely visible to the deadly ground missiles. Other pilots drop lower, flying just inches above the trees. But at 280 kilometers per hour, any sudden move is fatal. There is no team coordination. Radio channels explode with overlapping voices. Desperate warnings repeat over and over. Nobody has a clear picture of the battlefield. Every single choice is a massive risk. Turn back, and they fly directly into more missiles. Push forward, and they meet the angry drone swarm. There are absolutely no safe options left. A huge Ka-52 takes a heavy hit to its rear section. The tail rotor completely explodes into pieces. The aircraft spins wildly in the air and crashes into the deep forest. Nearby helicopters jerk away to avoid the flying metal. Because they were flying only 150 meters apart, they come dangerously close to hitting each other in mid-air. One tiny mistake means immediate death. Then, the invisible electronic war begins. Powerful jamming signals flood the combat zone. Inside the cockpits, the digital navigation screens flicker and die. The GPS signals become totally unstable. The pilots completely lose their exact positions in the dark. At such a low height, flying blind is a death sentence. Meanwhile, the drone swarm keeps hunting. Over 150 attack drones are now cutting through the thick smoke. They move fast and low. They are completely unpredictable. One pilot sees a drone and makes a sharp turn. He avoids the explosion, but his heavy machine clips the top of a tall tree. The engine instantly loses power, and the helicopter drops like a stone. Another pilot drops his altitude too fast to dodge a missile. He flies straight into the path of a waiting drone. In less than 2 minutes, the entire situation completely collapses. 28 out of the 36 advanced helicopters are destroyed or falling from the sky. The remaining 8 aircraft are scattered and badly damaged. There is no chain of command. What started as a highly organized strike has turned into isolated panic. Each surviving pilot is now completely alone, and the trap is actively closing behind them. 4:16 in the morning, the surviving helicopters desperately try to pull back, but the safe corridor they entered just minutes ago is completely gone. What looked like an easy route is now a closed box. The exit is no longer there. Missiles are still flying from the dark trees behind them. The fast drone swarm moves ahead of them, cutting off the only escape path. The pilots are trapped between 2 walls of fire. Every single choice leads directly into danger. Some pilots try to climb higher to see the incoming threats, but the higher altitude instantly exposes them to the ground teams. Other pilots stay extremely low. They fly just inches above the dirt. But at high speeds with heavily damaged flight controls, they cannot steer. One machine clips a heavy branch and smashes into the forest floor. Another attempts a sharp turn, but a drone hits the main engine. The power fails, and the heavy metal falls. Within 6 brutal minutes, the massive strike force is wiped out. 28 out of 36 helicopters are completely destroyed. The remaining few are scattered, heavily damaged, and running for their lives. What happened in those 6 minutes did not start that morning. It began days earlier. The enemy commanders chose this exact 30-kilometer corridor. It had flat ground and predictable flight paths. Then they carefully shaped the trap. They did not shut off their radar all at once. They dropped the signals slowly over 72 hours. They made it look like a natural system failure. They made the empty sky look like a golden opportunity. They moved 80 air defense teams into perfect positions. They prepared 150 explosive drones. They mapped every single firing angle. The 10-second radar flash was calculated perfectly to trigger the maximum amount of confusion. From the outside, the dark sky looked like a terrible weakness, but every single step was designed to guide the confident pilots forward. This total destruction shows a massive shift in how wars are fought today. For many decades, military power meant bigger systems, faster aircraft, and heavier bombs. But in this dark forest, that huge advantage meant absolutely nothing. A flying fortress worth over $800 million was completely broken apart. It was defeated by small ground teams, cheap commercial drones, and silent detection networks. The true power did not come from giant weapons. It came from how the cheap tools worked perfectly together. They stayed distributed, quiet, and totally invisible until it was too late. The enemy forces did not need to win control of the air. They only needed to control what the pilots believed. The corridor looked safe because the advanced computers said it was safe. That false belief did all the heavy work. By the time the 36 helicopters entered that airspace, the battle was already decided. The pilots did not lose control of the sky. They lost the battle the exact moment they trusted the silence. They did not fly into a fair fight. They were gently led into a massive trap, and they never made it out. At 2 a.m., a 45-car freight train departs Volgograd, bound for Port of Olya on the Caspian Sea. Hidden inside its reinforced central cars is nearly $1 billion in advanced missile systems and long-range strike drones, a shipment capable of shifting the balance of firepower in Iran within days. Moscow believes the Southern Rail Corridor is secure, protected by distance and a direct rail-to-sea transfer entirely inside Russian territory. But with just 300 kilometers left before reaching Olya, an explosion tears through the center of the train. A wall of fire races down the track, and a column of flame rises into the night sky. What was meant to cross the Caspian never reaches the sea. So, who tracked the shipment? Who struck it? And how did Russia's safest southern route turn into its most expensive rail loss of the war? Stay with us as we break down how this operation unfolded, step by step, and why the Caspian corridor will never move unseen again. At 2 a.m., a heavily loaded freight train departed from a rail junction outside Volgograd in southern Russia. Ukrainian intelligence was already monitoring the southern rail corridor when the train began moving. Its destination was the port of Olya, located in Astrakhan Oblast on the northern shoreline of the Caspian Sea. The route covered approximately 1,600 kilometers. Estimated travel time, 30 to 36 hours. The train consisted of 45 rail cars, 42 freight units and 3 technical escort cars positioned at the front and rear. On official shipping manifests, the cargo was described as industrial components and mechanical assemblies. But Ukrainian surveillance analysts had assessed the shipment differently. 8 central cars were reinforced with additional steel plating. 26 sealed container units were grouped tightly in the middle of the formation. 4 flatbed cars carried covered launch frames secured beneath heavy tarpaulins. The total cargo weight was assessed between 1,300 and 1,600 metric tons. Ukrainian intelligence estimates indicated the train was transporting approximately 52 short-range ballistic missile bodies and 30 solid-fuel rocket motors. Additional containers were believed to hold around 140 reconnaissance and strike unmanned aerial systems packed in modular crates. Nearly 95 inertial navigation and satellite guidance units were stored in reinforced cases, along with 44 detachable warhead assemblies. The combined military value of the shipment was estimated between $900 million and $1.1 billion US. For Ukraine, the implications were immediate. If the train reached Port of Olya, the transfer process would be rapid. Rail cargo could be offloaded directly onto Caspian cargo vessels within hours. From Olya, maritime transit to Iranian ports across the Caspian Sea would take less than 24 hours. Port of Olya functions as one of Russia's primary rail-to-sea gateways on the Caspian, handling hundreds of thousands of tons of freight each month and connecting directly to the southern railway grid. For Moscow, the corridor offered strategic advantages. It avoided monitored Black Sea routes. It remained entirely within Russian-controlled territory, and it provided a discrete inland-to-maritime transfer point. But rail transport carries one unavoidable weakness. It follows fixed tracks, and fixed tracks can be mapped. By the time the train passed the halfway point of its journey, Ukrainian surveillance platforms were tracking its movement continuously. The shipment was no longer just cargo. It was a Ukrainian-identified target moving south toward Port of Olya. The train was not identified by accident. It was identified through layered surveillance. The first anomaly appeared before departure. Satellite imagery showed 8 reinforced rail cars positioned at the center of the 45-car formation. The steel plating thickness was assessed at approximately 20 to 30 millimeters, unusual for civilian freight. Thermal imaging detected sustained internal heat signatures inside multiple central containers. Solid fuel rocket motors retain heat differently than industrial equipment. That observation triggered deeper monitoring. Signals intelligence then intercepted encrypted coordination traffic between a Southern Logistics Command node and railway control authorities. The communication referenced priority routing and restricted handling. Civilian cargo does not move under military priority. As the train moved south, aerial confirmation followed. A long-range reconnaissance platform captured high-resolution imagery of the formation during a scheduled slowdown. The count matched earlier assessment: 45 rail cars, 8 reinforced units in the center, 4 flatbeds carrying covered launch structures. Security detachments were visible near selected junctions along the route. Radio emissions analysis detected short encrypted bursts originating from within the central freight cluster. By the time the train crossed the 800-kilometer mark of its 1,600-kilometer journey, the picture was complete. More than 50 ballistic missile bodies, approximately 30 solid-fuel rocket motors, over 140 unmanned aerial systems packed in modular crates, 95 navigation and guidance modules, 44 detachable warhead assemblies. The shipment was no longer assessed as suspicious. It was confirmed as a large-scale military transfer heading toward the port of Olya. At its current speed, the train would arrive within 18 to 20 hours. Once unloaded and transferred to Caspian cargo vessels, interception would become significantly more difficult. Tracking had established scale, imagery had confirmed configuration, signals had validated military coordination. The decision phase was approaching, and the window was narrowing. By late afternoon, the train had covered more than half of its 1,600-kilometer route. Ukrainian intelligence continued tracking the formation as it moved steadily south at an average speed of 60 kilometers per hour. At that pace, it would reach the port of Olya within 18 hours. For Ukrainian planners, the window was narrowing. 3 operational options were evaluated. The first was immediate action along the northern segment of the route. That option carried higher escalation risk and increased visibility near major rail infrastructure. The second was to wait until the train approached Astrakhan Oblast, closer to Olya. But Russian security presence near the port region was stronger, and response forces could mobilize rapidly. The third option focused on a remote stretch of rail approximately 300 kilometers north of Olya. The terrain there was open and sparsely populated. Civilian traffic was limited. Military patrol density along that segment was comparatively low. For Ukraine, that corridor offered the highest probability of isolating the target before maritime transfer. Timing became decisive. If the train continued uninterrupted, offloading at Port of Olya could begin within hours of arrival. Rail-to-sea transfer operations typically required less than 3 hours under controlled conditions. Once cargo vessels departed across the Caspian Sea, interception opportunities would drop sharply. Ukrainian operational models indicated that within 24 hours of docking, the shipment could already be moving toward Iranian ports. That compressed the strike window. Weather conditions were assessed. Wind speeds along the selected rail segment were within operational limits for long-range Ukrainian unmanned strike systems. Visibility conditions favored low-altitude approach. A strike against a moving train risked partial destruction. A strike against a fixed train would maximize loss. Ukrainian planners defined the objective clearly: not symbolic damage, total interdiction, 45 cars, up to $1 billion in military hardware, more than 50 missile bodies and over 100 drone systems. If Ukraine acted, it had to eliminate the shipment before it reached Olya. The decision moved from monitoring to execution planning. The next phase would shift from surveillance to direct action. And once initiated, it would unfold in minutes, not hours. Once the remote rail segment was selected, planning accelerated. The chosen strike zone lay roughly 300 kilometers north of the port of Olya, along a sparsely populated corridor with limited civilian infrastructure. Rail traffic in that area averaged fewer than 6 freight movements per day. The terrain was flat and exposed. There were no major urban centers within a 20-kilometer radius. The objective was precise. The train had to be slowed, isolated, and fixed in position before any strike assets were committed. Rail transport offers efficiency, but it also follows a rigid signaling system. Control that system, and the train becomes predictable. Cyber units began targeting the automated rail control network responsible for managing a 15-kilometer stretch of track inside the designated zone. The system relied on synchronized signal relays spaced at regular intervals. If multiple relays failed simultaneously, standard safety protocol would force the train to reduce speed. Electronic warfare support was prepared to disrupt onboard and ground-based communications. The goal was not to blind an entire region. It was to create a temporary pocket of disruption around a single moving target. Strike assets were positioned in advance. 6 long-range unmanned strike platforms were assigned to the operation. Each carried a payload sufficient to penetrate reinforced rail cars and ignite volatile material stored within. Target priorities were established. Primary aim points included the central reinforced cars believed to contain solid fuel rocket motors. Secondary targets included flatbeds carrying launch structures and containers assessed to hold warhead assemblies. Total engagement time, once initiated, was projected at under 6 minutes. The entire sequence depended on timing. If the train passed beyond the designated zone, the opportunity would close. If it reached Astrakhan air defense coverage closer to Olya, interception risk would increase. By early evening, the train was less than 2 hours from the selected segment. Tracking confirmed speed at 58 kilometers per hour. All strike platforms were on standby. The plan was no longer theoretical. It was synchronized. Observation had defined the target. Now the operation moved toward execution. Within hours, the Caspian rail corridor would either remain intact or be permanently exposed. The train entered the designated rail segment shortly after nightfall. Speed held steady at just under 60 kilometers per hour. The strike window had opened. The first action was not explosive. It was digital. Simultaneously, multiple rail signal relays across a 15-kilometer stretch began transmitting conflicting status data. Within seconds, the automated control network detected irregularities. Standard safety protocol activated. Signal indicators along the line shifted to caution. Inside the locomotive cabin, warning alerts triggered. The engineer reduced throttle. Speed dropped from 58 to 35 kilometers per hour, then to 20. Electronic interference followed. Short-range communications between escort units and regional control nodes began to degrade. Encrypted bursts failed to transmit fully. Radio channels filled with static. The disruption was contained within the strike corridor. Outside that pocket, the rail network functioned normally. Inside it, the train was increasingly isolated. At reduced speed, the formation entered the center of the selected zone. A second wave of signal failure forced a full stop. Braking pressure increased gradually to prevent derailment. 45 rail cars settled motionless on open track. From deceleration to complete stop, the sequence lasted less than 2 minutes. Security units near the forward cars attempted to re-establish contact with railway control. They received no clear response. Thermal surveillance confirmed the train's stationary status. 45 cars, 8 reinforced central units, all aligned within the predefined engagement grid. This was the moment planners had anticipated. A moving target is difficult to neutralize completely. A stationary train loaded with solid fuel rocket motors and warhead assemblies presents a different equation. Within the disruption corridor, there were no active rail crossings, no adjacent civilian traffic, and no urban infrastructure within immediate blast radius. The objective had been achieved. The train was fixed in place. All that remained was the strike. Overhead, unmanned platforms adjusted final approach vectors. Target coordinates were already locked. The next phase would not unfold over hours. It would unfold in seconds. And once initiated, there would be no recovery window for the Caspian shipment heading toward Olya. The first impact struck the center of the formation. One of the reinforced rail cars erupted in a flash of light and pressure. For a brief moment, the damage appeared contained. A localized detonation inside a single armored unit. Then the temperature spikes surged. Inside that car were solid fuel rocket motors. Heat builds rapidly in sealed compartments. 30 seconds later, the first secondary explosion tore through the side plating. Flame and debris burst outward across the adjacent trackbed. A second strike hit a flatbed unit carrying covered launch structures. The tarp ignited instantly. Fragments of composite material scattered across the rail line. 2 additional munitions impacted the central container cluster within seconds of each other. One penetrated a unit assessed to contain detachable warhead assemblies. The resulting blast wave was significantly stronger than the initial detonation. Shock pressure rolled down the length of the train. Cars 3 through 7 from the center were lifted partially off alignment. Thermal sensors recorded peak temperatures exceeding 1800 degrees Celsius within the core section. The chain reaction had begun. One burning container ignited the next. Rocket propellant fed the fire. Metal seams ruptured under internal pressure. Within 4 minutes, more than a dozen secondary explosions were detected along the formation. Flatbed-mounted drone systems detonated in sequence, their fuel cells contributing to the expanding fire zone. Security personnel moved away from the central blast area as additional explosions triggered unpredictably. From above, infrared imagery showed a continuous line of fire stretching over 400 meters of track. 32 of the 45 rail cars were either destroyed outright or consumed by fire. 9 more suffered catastrophic structural damage. Only 4 cars at the outer edges remained intact. Rail infrastructure beneath the central blast zone was severely compromised. Steel track segments warped. Wooden sleepers ignited. Sections of ballast were displaced by shock pressure. Total destructive phase time, under 6 minutes. The train that had departed at 2 a.m. with over $1 billion in military cargo was no longer a transport convoy. It was burning wreckage on an exposed stretch of rail 300 kilometers north of the port of Olya. The Caspian shipment would go no further. By the time the fires began to subside, the scale of destruction was clear. Out of 45 rail cars, 32 were completely destroyed. 9 more were structurally compromised beyond recovery. Only 4 outer cars remained largely intact. The central section of the train, where the most sensitive cargo had been stored, was reduced to twisted metal and scorched debris. Post-strike analysis estimated that between 40 and 50 short-range ballistic missile bodies were lost in the explosion. At least 25 solid-fuel rocket motors were assessed as fully destroyed. More than 100 unmanned aerial systems were either burned or detonated during secondary blasts. 95 navigation and guidance modules, along with over 40 detachable warhead assemblies, were rendered unusable. The total material loss was estimated between 700 million and 1 billion US dollars. But the physical damage was only part of the impact. The rail line itself suffered severe structural damage across a 400-meter segment. Steel rails warped under extreme heat. Track supports were shattered. Repair operations would require heavy engineering equipment and days of uninterrupted work. The Caspian Rail Corridor, intended to move high-value military cargo discreetly toward the port of Olya, was no longer secure. Even if alternate routes were available, every future shipment would now move under the assumption of surveillance. Confidence in the corridor had been broken. Port of Olya never received the cargo scheduled for offload. No transfer to Caspian vessels occurred. No maritime transit toward Iranian ports began. The strategic effect extended beyond a single destroyed train. Rail transport had been chosen for efficiency and control. But fixed tracks create predictable pathways. And predictable pathways can be mapped, monitored, and interrupted. The shipment had traveled more than half its journey. It was within 300 kilometers of Olya, hours away from transfer. Yet it never reached the Caspian Sea. In modern warfare, destroying a launch site eliminates one weapon system. Disrupting a supply corridor delays dozens. This operation did not target a battlefield. It targeted the flow that feeds the battlefield. And once that flow is exposed, it rarely moves unseen again. This was not just a destroyed train. It was a Ukrainian deep interdiction operation inside Russian territory. For months, Moscow relied on the Caspian Rail Corridor to move high-value military cargo south without crossing contested waters. The assumption was simple. Inland rail movement would attract less scrutiny than air transport. Maritime transfer across the Caspian would remain outside direct confrontation. Volume would offset risk. Ukraine challenged all three. By tracking, fixing, and destroying the shipment before it reached Port of Olya, Ukrainian forces demonstrated an expanding capability to disrupt strategic logistics far from the front line. This was not a battlefield strike. It was logistics warfare. Rail infrastructure depends on predictability. Ports depend on timing. Once Ukraine proved the corridor could be mapped and intercepted, every future shipment along that route carries elevated risk. The material loss approached $1 billion, but the larger consequence is delay. Without those missile bodies and long-range strike drones, projected reinforcement timelines shift. Deployment cycles slow. Operational planning must adjust. For Ukraine, the message was clear. No transfer route is beyond reach. Not air, not sea, not rail. The train departed at 2 a.m. carrying hardware capable of altering the balance of firepower in Iran within days. It never reached the Caspian Sea. It never reached Olya. And it never completed the transfer that had been planned. In modern war, destroying equipment matters, but disrupting supply corridors matters more. This operation was not just an explosion on open track. It was Ukraine striking at the flow that feeds the battlefield. And once that flow is exposed, it rarely moves unseen again. If you found this breakdown useful, subscribe for more in-depth analysis of how modern supply lines shape the battlefield. And comment below with your view on whether targeting logistics changes the balance more than direct strikes. At exactly 6:47 in the morning, the Crimean skyline was torn apart by the first wave of the most audacious deep strike operation of 2026. From hidden launch sites scattered across the coastline, 300 medium strike drones erupted into the sky, screaming toward their targets. These were not cheap plastic quadcopters bought off the shelf. They were $50,000 precision-guided beasts flying at 110 miles per hour and maintaining a silent radio discipline that would make a Tier 1 special operations team proud. Their objective was not just destruction, but a highly calculated psychological and financial assault on the defensive grid. To pierce the early warning network, the drone swarm executed a flawless sea-skimming flight profile. They hugged the Whitecaps at a terrifying altitude of just 9 meters, slicing through the morning sea spray. At this incredibly low level, they were completely swallowed by surface clutter, where radar waves scramble and break against the moving ocean. The screens inside the command bunkers remained a calm, empty green. The operators stared at their monitors, completely unaware that a massive strike force was barreling toward them. The drones operated in total silence, ghosting through the blind spots of one of the most heavily defended airspaces on the planet. But as the swarm crossed the 20-mile mark, the controllers executed a synchronized command that changed everything. The entire formation pitched up violently, climbing sharply from 9 meters to 150 meters in a matter of seconds. Instantly, the S-400 and Book M3 radar arrays went from dead silent to screaming. It was a mathematical and tactical nightmare for the defenders. The radar signatures of the incoming drones had been electronically amplified using advanced spoofing technology. On the monitors, the swarm did not look like small drones. It looked exactly like a massive saturation strike of heavy Tomahawk cruise missiles. The base commander had less than 15 seconds to make a life-or-death decision. With panic filling the bunker, he screamed the order to fire. The sky erupted in a multi-billion-dollar light show. Twin 30mm autocannons spun up with a deafening roar while $2.5 million interceptor missiles roared off their rails. They left long, jagged white scars across the morning blue as they hunted down $50,000 drones. It was an unwinnable equation. For every drone neutralized, the defenders were burning a massive hole in their own defense budget using interceptors that cost more than a luxury estate to swat down remote-controlled aircraft. But the defenders missed the most dangerous part of the entire play. Every time a missile battery fired, it broadcasted its exact GPS coordinates like a blazing neon beacon. Miles away, hidden in the shadows of the coastal hills, local resistance members with passive sensors were silently logging every single radar frequency and every repositioned launcher. The drone swarm was never meant to survive. It was a massive decoy designed to force the enemy to open their eyes and reveal their locations. By fighting back, the defenders had just handed the attackers the digital keys to their entire air defense network. While the defenders were still blindly firing multi-million-dollar interceptors at the drone decoy swarm, a second much deadlier threat entered the battle space. 15 Storm Shadow cruise missiles screamed off their launch rails from deep inside Ukrainian territory. The second these birds cleared the deck, they dipped their noses and went hunting. They were cruising at 650 miles per hour, which is passenger jet speed, but speed was not the ultimate flex here. Stealth and terrain following precision were the real weapons. We are talking about 15 heavy warheads flying at an altitude of barely 100 feet, hugging the jagged terrain like downhill skiers on a gold medal run. They threaded through river valleys and whipped around limestone ridgelines following a highly classified GPS-mapped backdoor that the drone swarm had ripped open just an hour earlier. They were ghosting through every single blind spot in the radar net, like professional burglars who already possess the floor plans of a bank vault. 20 minutes into the chaotic engagement, a Panzer S-1 battery positioned on the western perimeter finally caught a flickering ghost on the glass. The operator saw 15 low-altitude signatures materializing from the northwest, and his heart rate instantly tripled. He slammed the engage button, and the twin 30mm cannons howled to life, spitting a literal wall of lead, while 4 interceptor missiles roared into the sky in a rapid-fire sequence. The lead Storm Shadow took a direct hit. Its guidance package was shredded by a cloud of tungsten fragments, causing it to lose its brain and spiral into an empty field 14 miles short of the target. But that was the only lucky shot the defenders would get today. As the next interceptor closed within 800 meters, the remaining Storm Shadows fought back. This is where the engagement shifted from brute force to high-tech electronic warfare. The onboard electronic warfare suite of the missiles kicked into overdrive, acting like a miniature jamming aircraft. It spoofed the terminal seeker of the incoming missile, tricking its computer into thinking the target was 60 meters to the left. The interceptor sailed right past, hitting nothing but empty wind and detonating harmlessly over the coastline. The defending crew was frantic. They repositioned their radar arrays, desperately trying to find a clean lock on the remaining missiles, but they were literally looking at dirt. The Storm Shadows were intentionally staying below the engagement envelope of the heavy S-400 systems, making the radar screens completely useless. 14 high-explosive delivery trucks breached the final defensive perimeter and were now less than 4 minutes away from the most expensive military targets on the Crimean coast. While the defending crews were desperately tracking the incoming cruise missiles from the north, the Black Sea decided to join the carnage. 25 Magura 5 uncrewed surface vessels had been running completely dark since midnight. They maintained absolute radio silence with 0 radar emissions, relying strictly on a pre-programmed GPS track and a massive payload of bad intentions. These were not simple patrol boats. Each one was a high-speed, aquatic assassin packed with over 400 pounds of high explosives, skimming the waves at 40 miles per hour. They approached the military harbor of Sevastopol completely undetected, because the coastal radar operators were too busy staring up at the sky to look down at the water. Just as the harbor defense units finally spotted the swarm of explosive surface drones tearing through the outer perimeter, a completely new threat erupted from the northwest. 10 Ukrainian Neptune land attack missiles roared off their mobile trucks hidden deep inside a forest that the defenders had sworn was a tactical blind spot.